Hi, welcome to AI for Good. My name is Juan, and I am part of the International Telecommunication Union, or the ITU, the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies. AI for Good is the United Nations leading platform for action-oriented, global, and inclusive dialogue on AI solutions to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And we're really excited about this session in particular. It's my session, but that's not biased, hopefully, because AI for Good Let's Talks is our series of fireside chats dedicated to discussing the intersection of AI, the human experience in our quest to build a better world. And I'm really excited today because I have a good friend on board, and we're going to be talking a lot about smart cities and smart mobility, two things that we do care about quite a bit. So I just want to let you know that this conversation is live, meaning that all of this is impromptu. I'm just speaking right now in front of you. So if you have any questions, any comments, feel free to put them in any of our chats on social media. My Padawan, Melissa, will be following up, checking out all the social media channels to make sure that your questions are part of the conversation. So why don't we say hi? Hi, Melissa. How's it going?
Hello. Good, thanks. I'm very excited to see all the questions people will be coming up with today.
It sounds like that's not something we normally say on a Friday, but it's true. Yeah. Yeah. So without further ado, I'd like to talk a little bit about today's guest. So today's Let's Talk, we will be connecting with Gürkan Solmaz from NEC Labs Europe. And we'll be talking about, again, like I said, smart cities and smart mobility. In particular, we'll be discussing AI enhancement for machine learning, the Internet of Things, and situation awareness as key enablers for these domains. And these are things actually Gürkan and I have talked about before offline, actually. So this is something that I'm really excited to kind of have this conversation with him. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Gürkan on board. Hi, Gürkan. How's it going?
Hi, Juan. It's going well. How about you?
Pretty good. You know, it's a Friday. But
with both of you today, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, no, it's great to see you. Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive in? I know you have a really big, you have a really great career. So just kind of want to share that with people.
Thank you for thinking like that. So I'm a researcher in NEC Labs Europe in Germany. We are located in Heidelberg, and I've been living in Germany for the last 5 years. And before Germany, I was in the USA. I was living in Orlando, Florida for my PhD. And originally, I'm from Turkey, where I was born in Ankara, and I grew up in Ankara also.
Yeah. No, that's fantastic.
And for my research interest, I think you already summarized. I'm interested in AI for smart cities, smart mobility, and more particularly, I'm interested in machine learning, Internet of Things, and those kind of things.
Yeah. So I know we've had these conversations, like I said, and one of the things that struck me is that you have such a varied background, and you come from different perspectives on these technologies. And I was just really curious as to why you were particularly interested in smart cities and smart mobilities and what got you started on that route.
Yeah, good question. Actually, it was a little bit of a coincidence, maybe, but maybe it's not a big coincidence, because when I first started a PhD, I was looking for a research topic like any other PhD student, and I was discussing with my advisor pretty frequently. And so the discussions went through in a way like, can we do something for where we lived, which is Orlando at that time. And Orlando has a lot of theme parks.
Right.
So the discussion was like, maybe we can do some, and our lab was about wireless sensor networking. So we were thinking maybe we can apply wireless sensor network in theme parks. Then we noticed theme parks has a lot of humans, so people move around all the time. So it kind of, maybe not a big coincidence, it came in a way like we start working on human mobility. Yeah. Very early on in my PhD. And afterwards, when you work on these things for quite a while, you notice there are a lot of correlation with smart cities also, because in the cities also people move around. And then there are also vehicles in the cities, so it's a little bit more kind of general environment maybe. And a lot of applications are going on, like new applications are coming for smart cities. Various groups work on it all over the world. And some of the technologies are, as you see, interchangeable in theme parks, smart cities, and then smart mobility also. which also has autonomous driving, different mobility as a service technologies.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting that you compare it to theme parks, because so when I used to work at Disney, one of the things that's really interesting was going to the Imagineering team and kind of seeing what their work is. And it's fascinating because you see, the prototype of Disneyland, and the whole point of it was to imagine, original point of it was to imagine the city of the future. And that's why they were building all these like communities around it. And it's fascinating to see that paradigm now in like places like Silicon Valley or any place that's kind of mimicking that sort of paradigm, right? Like you're building big tech companies and you're building communities around it. Is that something where you see kind of cities trending towards in the future, given like the advances we're doing in smart mobility and smart cities?
Yeah, I think there are some correlations. So today, actually, I wasn't planning to talk about theme parks at all, but now you ask how you get into it very first.
Yeah.
Actually, we had smart city projects in NEC Labs Europe that actually shaped my work on smart city mainly because the last 5 years I worked on some different smart city projects. And currently, I also work on another EU project, which is also related to, for instance, localization for 5G. 5G means people using smartphone also, and also context awareness. And this context awareness means how you understand the context of the environment. So when you understand the context, then you can provide better services. So this is, of course, useful for theme parks, but also smart cities, because then you can provide better services in the smart city to the residents and also to the tourists. So that's why, for instance, in theme park, when you go, you are a customer, they serve you with the different services, you wait in a line there, you do some activities, you go to a restaurant in the theme park or so. So similar things that you can consider also in the smart city, of course. And also similarly, there is a safety aspect, security, and so on.
Right. Yeah, that's really fascinating. I guess if you take a look at it, a city would consider its residents and its tourists as like their customers, right? And that's, I think, from my perspective, which is, I guess, more limited than yours, that there is a big challenge in terms of like servicing those needs across different types of contexts and different types of cities. Like you come from Turkey, for example, and the type of services and public services and needs are very, from a smart city perspective, are very different from a place like Barcelona or Manila. And I'm curious as to whether you found any challenges in deployment or even prototyping, given that sort of context.
There are quite differences, as you said, from region to region in the world. For instance, Asia versus Europe versus USA in terms of smart cities, but also mobility, for instance, autonomous driving applications, how much it's allowed, how much is innovative it is, and things like that. Interesting, smart cities are really, it's a very interesting concept all over the world. I have seen many people in this last 5 years. I met with people from Asia, let's say Middle East, Turkey, Europe. They are all very interested in smart city and they are investing in this. Even the small cities in Turkey, for instance, I met in a congress, kind of coincidentally people. They were really interested and we found each other and start talking about the applications they do in a small city in Turkey, for instance.
Right, right. So what is the most simplest type of application you've seen? Because I think that's kind of the challenge too, right? We're looking at giant technology gaps from big cities in comparison to like small villages. And I mean, those are definitely challenges, but do you see any type of small level or like small scale applications that definitely work in those contexts, like in smaller towns and smaller cities?
Yes, I think some technologies are applicable in both small and also larger cities. But of course, when you have a larger city, maybe you have a more chance to try kind of larger applications. But maybe when you are a small city, then you have the chance to more go experimental and try something new, completely new. Then, for instance, you may have a pilot city, a small city where you try some new innovation, and if it works fine, you can apply in the large city.
I see, I see. So I think one thing that's really interesting here, and I know we brought it up a little bit, is the concept of Internet of Things. When we look at smart cities and smart mobility, essentially we're looking at Internet of Things at scale, right? Or at least, but when we normally talk about Internet of Things at the personal or micro scale, it's like when we discuss like what smart home products are like. And do you think smart home products will play a correlated role in this ecosystem of smart cities and smart mobility? Say if there's a fire happening, And I think this is a good example. I'm thinking of one that actually is a personal example from when I was building smart thermostats. Um, if there's a fire happening like somewhere, is it wise to deploy like an alert through your smart thermostat to tell people, okay, there's a fire, you need to get out, like for example in California, or is that something that's going to be a concern down the line?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. And you gave a really good example already. I should say something here because our group is really interested in the concept of digital twins. And digital twins are kind of we consider as the future for this type of environment, also for the smart cities. And in this concept, for instance, we consider you might have a digital twin of a city, a smart city large scale. And then in this digital twin, maybe you have also digital twin of a home. So every home might have a digital twin. So what that means is you have sensors, for instance, in the smart home, and you have people, you have different rooms and things. So you can have all of these maybe also as a digital version of this. You keep the information going from this smart home, such as you said, the room temperature, this and that, and you can also kind of have the simulated version in the digital environment.
Right.
So this can, of course, enable many different services, but also this would enable connect to the city digital twin. You can connect the smart home digital twin to the city digital twin, so you have an overall view. But of course, there's always the thing, because you have your own digital twin in a smart home. For instance, you are a homeowner, you may choose which information you share with the city, which information you don't share with the city. So you can have flexibility and so on. And you can even have simulation, and not for smart homes maybe, but also for smart homes. You can have a simulation and you can predict, for instance, when you set the heater this temperature and the weather will be like this tomorrow, then how will be the home temperature. So you can predict those kind of things using AI.
Right. No, that's fantastic. And I think you brought up a point that I was going to bring up anyway, because we've had these conversations about IoT security, and I think the challenge, I personally find it would be a challenge to gather data for digital twins at a micro scale, right? We're talking about individuals, and we're talking about consent of data, and not only consent in terms of like consenting over and over again to maintain temporality of the data, right? And I was just curious about what your thoughts were on that, because I think as we go through a digital transformation, not like with smart cities, we do have to consider the fact that we need to continually update these data. And some people may not have either the data or not be comfortable with sharing data.
Yes, this is, of course, a very important issue. So I believe there are maybe two aspects, at least I can tell you two aspects. One is the data aspect. For instance, which data you share. The other is AI aspect, because when you share your data, you want to know how it is handled by AI. And so there, actually, trustworthy AI is a very popular concept right now. And for instance, I also do some voluntary work in ACM, which is the computing association all over the world, and I'm involved particularly in the ACM Europe Technology Policy Council, where we work on, for instance, different working groups such as autonomous systems, smart cities, also, and there is a lot of discussions going on about trustworthy AI, how AI should be for these kind of applications.
Right. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing to bring up. I think that there are working groups obviously within the ACM doing that. Of course I know because I'm part of it. But I think the thing that I think makes this interesting is the technical communication side as well, right? Like obviously we're using an AI for good platform to talk about these conversations, but these conversations don't necessarily happen in for people who are on the ground, right? Like, I mean, if I went to the Philippines and I talked to my mom about this, or like someone off the street, I think it's very difficult to explain the value of data privacy, but also data sharing, the fine balance between the two. And so in the service of public services. And so I was just curious about whether that's something that you've encountered, or is that something that you've like had to think about too in the process of developing the type of innovations you're working on?
Yeah, that's a good question. Of course, every project we work has an aspect on this, so that everything is like considered this type of things. But also in general, in my opinion, everyone has the concern. including technical people like ourselves or non-technical people who do other jobs, for instance. Non-technical for the sense of AI, for instance. But there is, of course, the difference on understanding on the technology, because if you don't understand the technology very well, then also you might have, for instance, unnecessary lack of trust or maybe too much trust. So for those, of course, it will be always good to have this kind of discussion and maybe even longer ones where you kind of go into the technical details so people also can understand.
No, that makes sense.
For the data, there is, for instance, very interesting concept I heard from others recently was this data literacy. Data literacy means, for instance, when you read a book, like you are a literate person, you can read it. So similarly, for data literacy means you understand how your data is handled, how your data is, which data is shared, this and that. And so I really believe, maybe including myself, many people lack data literacy in certain aspects.
Yeah.
So that also creates the lack of trust, of course.
Right.
But I would definitely suggest to check out any activity from this ACM Europe TPC group, because there are also statements about this where you can see more technical detail how AI should be, or how, for instance, for contact tracing, there was also a statement which was very popular, which shows how COVID-19 contact tracing application should be, as a kind of statement from the ACM. And also it has a lot of technical details in a very concise form, maybe 2-pager.
Right.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm not very familiar with the applications in smart cities. So I was wondering if you would be able to share some of your favorite projects or most interesting projects that you've really liked working on, and how you see this maybe developing or applying in other cities in the future.
Thank you for your question, Melissa. I may mention maybe the last 2 projects I've been working on, which are very interesting. Currently I'm working on the Locus project, which is an EU research project, and I shortly mentioned it. It's about 5G localization and context awareness. Basically, you can think of analytics using the 5G data, 5G localization. We have 3 different use cases here, or proof of concept projects we will have. The first one is people mobility, about understanding people mobility in a city, large scale. This includes, for instance, how people flow from one area to another and things like that. That would be actually good for maybe city urban planning, could be useful for providing better services to the residents or tourists. And also, of course, today we have this pandemic, for instance. It would be really good to understand how people move. And then this would be also useful for response to the pandemic or epidemics. The second one is about self-driving vehicles. This is also very interesting. It's about autonomous driving. I want to mention the other project because that was more focused on autonomous driving. And the third one is network management. Because if you have, for instance, in a smart city, you have various network devices where people want to always be connected and use different services using internet, 5G. So then the question is, we need to also manage the network. So there's always these services that we see as the users, but also there's underlying services like network infrastructure. So this should be also managed. Also, we can also consider as a service for smart city, because if your city is a smart city, then it has a better network management in the background compared to another city which is not smart, let's say. That city maybe doesn't have any it has, of course, all city, but maybe not very optimized network management. So for this reason, people mobility, autonomous driving, network management, these are really, I also find really interesting. I also worked on them before myself. Also currently I'm working on the people mobility aspect more. And the second project I want to mention is actually finished. It was finished last year, and it was called Autopilot. And this project is about autonomous driving enhanced with IoT, where we had a lot of sensors in the vehicle, but also in the roadside, and we have also cloud infrastructure, edge devices, and so on. And we had, for instance, ITS 5G devices, 5G communication. Those kind of things are all tested in a pilot scale. pilot sites. So why I say autonomous driving when you ask me smart cities is because, in my opinion, autonomous driving will be also part of the smart city. So that will be also a service. Maybe we will be transported in the city using autonomous vehicles. I'm saying as a speculation, but it's already happening in some places. You see already maybe buses, autonomous bus take you from somewhere to another.
It's pretty cool.
So this is really intermixed with each other, in my opinion, smart city and smart mobility.
Yeah, very interconnected. So we have a question from one of our audience members. So they wanted to know if you see any applications of digital twins being applied to physical robotic avatars. Don't know if you know much about that.
What is a physical robotic avatar? I really don't know what we mean.
So a good example of that would be like, you know how you use robot avatars for disaster prevention or bomb de-escalation, that sort of situation probably.
Oh yeah, I understand. I think it makes sense, of course. These digital twin and robotics would be intercorrelated, like because you will have the data that is gathered by the sensors of this robot. Like normally, let's say we have our sensors, eyes and ears, and so the robot will also have a camera, will have a microphone. So all this data should be, first of all, should be collected. But then also, based on this data, you need to do predictions, understanding the environment, for instance, recognition of the environment. Let's say, as Juan gave this very good example now, you have maybe a safety robot, and this robot have some sensors, collect data from sensor, then you need to recognize what's going on. Is there an injured person, or is there a place you need to check out? So these things can be done in the digital twin, because you have a maybe digital twin of a robot, like consider like a human avatar, similar robot avatar. You have all the data, so you know what are the sense data. Also even historically, but at this point real time too, then you can have AI on it, which works on this data and does predictions, recognition of the context. For instance, says, oh, there is this context that there is some problem here, maybe you need to check this area. Then based on this, you can control the robot using the digital twin of the robot, yes.
Right.
So futuristic sounding to me, but that's very cool.
Actually, I had a good question, because it's maybe a good segue to the whole idea of smart mobility and a smart city, right? One of the things that's really good about integrating both is kind of the concept of safety, right? And traffic systems, making sure the network management for these transportation vehicles at scale is efficient and good and optimized enough that there's no issues and crashes. But obviously, like the history of within the history of autonomous vehicles, obviously there have been a lot of crashes. And is this something like, do you personally feel comfortable in the deployment of digital twins for autonomous vehicles right now on the roads, or is that something that we're not ready for yet?
I believe probably there are some applications. So digital twin is a new concept. So maybe they don't use the name digital twin for the thing they are doing with autonomous driving. But if you see an autonomous driving, you may assume some of the data is collected also in the cloud.
Right.
I should say most of the data collected by autonomous driving vehicles are not sent to cloud, because the vehicle collects a lot of data. So you cannot send all this data. So most of them are kind of used, and let's say normally when you use your vehicle, drive your vehicle, you have some speed measurement, this and that. They are not saved, they are just measured and gone. So similarly in the autonomous driving vehicle, also you have a lot of sensors. This data, most of them are just used at that time, that not saved, but only some of them, a very small subset, is sent to the cloud. Or you can also have in the vehicle, you have an operating system. In autopilot, we have this in autonomous driving vehicle. You have all the sensor data, not all of them, again, partial. Some of the sensor data is there. You can have your digital twin already in the car, for instance. Right. So this is probably going on at a certain point. Even in our project, we had some data collected in the vehicle edge IoT platform, IoT platform. So that was already kind of representation of a digital twin of the vehicle in the car. And also this operating system was also having, of course, other objects around. For instance, some tree recognized by the camera was also stored in the operating system, or used, consumed. So the question is, of course, how you design how you design these future applications to make it more trustworthy in various senses, in terms of safety, providing safety, in terms of making ethical choice, in terms of ethical choice, meaning basically a vehicle is also kind of a robot, makes different choices. So these choices should be justified. And could be which type of data you collect, is it really necessary? Those things are all design choices that we need to work and make sure that we have the trustworthy autonomous driving vehicle. And also same for digital twin, of course. We should have a trustworthy digital twin so that we can make use of these applications, because I believe they will really improve the safety of people after all. Of course, there are these accidents happening, but any new, let's say, application technology have accidents. But the idea is when you have everything fully, let's say, automized, you maybe have close to zero accident, then it will be safer than a current situation.
Yeah.
And also more effective. Maybe I can give you later some detail.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. No, I was thinking about it too, because I think when we talk about digital twins from an autonomous vehicle concept, regardless of what its terminology is being used, it tends to be generally more localized, right? Like you're right, like we don't send all the data to the cloud, and even then, it's the question of what type of data are we sending to the cloud. I think ITU in particular has a focus group on autonomous and assisted driving, trying to solve that sort of question, especially in the context of crashes and accidents. And yeah, I think the challenge here for me personally is to see what data is necessary for a smart city to operate at scale, to be mindful and cognizant of like the autonomous vehicles that are within its system, right? Like you're dealing with traffic, not just for public vehicles, but also private vehicles. And then there's a whole question of what data is necessary from private vehicles, because public vehicles, potentially you could have all that data if you really wanted it, right? If it's public.
And how long you'd have to keep it for as well.
Yeah.
Because, obviously cities operate on long term, but then how long do you need to keep the data for to be able to make long-term decisions, and when do you get rid of it? Because that's also taking up digital space.
Right.
Yeah.
Good questions. Short answer, I don't know. Long answer, it is. I think it needs to be discussed and decided, and it should be regulated, of course, as any other technology. It should be regulated. For instance, EU Commission had a recently trustworthy AI statement, which was kind of a step towards this type of regulation. And the people who design this technology should read this statement, and or policymakers should work on this, but also technology makers. They work together to do. But of course, then the resident involvement, because you do a smart city technology, for instance, then the city, what the residents of the city thinks also is very important. So human aspects are really in the core of smart city, in my opinion. Yeah.
No, that's a fair point, and that's kind of what AI for Good is somewhat about, right? Connecting problem owners with problem solvers, developing solutions that help people accelerate the sustainable development goals. I know this was not, by the way, lead into that pitch. This really like just came to my mind. But yeah, we're running out of time, so hopefully, I'd love to ask Gurkan, do you have any last words or thoughts you want to share with us about your work and what you're passionate about? So.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to this talk, and it was really interesting discussion, and we went to really interesting points, in my opinion, in a short time. So I hope it was also useful for an audience, and also for me it was already pretty useful to discuss with you different applications in smart city and mobility.
Yeah, I'm really happy. You know, for me, it's like we can always continue these discussions like with a drink over the weekend, but it's always nice to be able to do this publicly too, and have kind of like be able to just discuss it like with people. Chat. So, but yeah, thanks so much, Gurkan. So I'm going to say goodbye now, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's next and where you can find what's next on AI for Good. So I'll see you in a sec.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So Melissa, why don't you just take it away and tell us where people can find our next programming?
Thanks, Juan. And thanks again for everyone who joined us on this week's Let's Talk. We have a bunch of really exciting content coming your way. For more information on that, check out our programming on aiforgood.itu.int. Thanks very much, and back over to you, Juan.
Thanks so much, Melissa. So if you're interested in seeing all this content, we do have it available streaming on our YouTube channel. Search for youtube.com AI for good. It's also on Twitter and on our social media on LinkedIn and Facebook as well. If you have any questions about AI for good, feel free to email us at ai@itu.int. And for everything else, feel free to check out our website for our upcoming sessions. Again, my name is Juan. I work for the International Telecommunication Union, or ITU, and I look forward to seeing you at the next AI for Good. Thank you. Have a good day, okay? See you later.